Hello, we are Group 1 and we will be doing our presentation on the civil rights. Daisy Bates was born under the legal name Daisy Lee Gatson. She was born November 11, 1914 in Huttig, Arkansas. She was raised by Orly and Susie Smith, for Daisy's biological mother had been murdered by 3 white men when Daisy was only an infant. Daisy's biological father fled town in fear of retaliation from the 3 white men. As a child, Daisy Bates attended a segregated school in Huttig, Arkansas. In 1928, Daisy met Lucius Christopher Bates, who was an insurance agent at the time. In 1941, Daisy and Elsie moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. The couple married a year later. Together, the couple advocated for civil rights through the newspaper, the Arkansas Press. Their newspaper detailed the occurrences during the civil rights movement and the grim oppression people within the black community faced. Both Daisy and Elsie were active supporters of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Throughout the 1950s, Daisy and her husband worked with members of the Little Rock branch of the NAACP to encourage integration within Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. Together, they urged the school board to integrate their school. The 1954 U.S. Supreme Court decision of Brown versus the Board of Education declared the racial segregation of school districts as unconstitutional. In 1957, Daisy Bates recruited 9 black students to test the ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court case through the desegregation of Central High School. These 9 students were known as the Little Rock Nine. Each of the students possessed the utmost strength and willpower to face the oppositions within the school. This event was so significant to the civil rights movement because it signified the ending of the segregation. In 1962, Daisy Bates' memoir, The Long Shadow of Little Rock, was published and later won the American Book Award. The novel detailed her own perspective of the integration of Central High School. Several of the Little Rock Nine went on to live very honorable lives. Daisy Bates died of a heart attack on November 4, 1999 in Little Rock, Arkansas. Daisy Bates played such an important role in advocating civil rights, racial equality, and justice. She was able to speak volumes for the black community who did not have a voice, and is admired throughout time for her contributions and achievements.
She was an female civil rights activist born in 1917. Fanny was very passionate about many civil rights issues, and perhaps the most impressive to me was her fearlessness, especially when she and a group of fellow activists challenged the Mississippi's all-white segregated delegation. Also in 1964, Hammer helped to organize African American voter registration drive in her home state of Mississippi. Miss Hammer was a part of many organizations. The first became involved in 1962. After attending a protest, her life was a perfect example for living and giving back to make the world a better place. I feel like Hammer would be pleased to know that we still study and discuss her many works and lessons today. Miss Hammer changed her world and ours by she worked with Dr. King in peaceful protests which gained steam around the 1960s. She was a part of nonviolent sit-ins, and which started in a North Carolina college town. The sit-ins spread to other cities, which students often facing violence but never retaliating. She worked close with Dr. King, who organized a conference in the 1960s to discuss other civil rights and with activists and students. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was a result of this and was formed by students from both South and North Carolina. The SNCC and its leaders, including Fannie Lou Hammer, James Farmer, and others organized sit-ins at lunch counters and other segregated businesses, as well as pray-ins in segregated churches, pools, and white-only public swimming pools.
My name is Samantha Eddy, and my part of the Civil Rights Era project was on Bobby Seale and the NAACP. Bobby Seale was a civil rights activist known for his radical and militaristic views. He co-founded the Black Panther Party in 1966 along with his college friend Huey Newton. They were inspired in part by Malcolm X. Notably, Bobby Seale was indicted as one of the Chicago 8 in 1969. He was put on trial for a conspiracy to cause a riot. At the trial, a judge had him bound and gagged, and he was denied his right to a lawyer. Bobby Seale is important because the Chicago 8 case was the first time that an anti-riot law had gone to trial. And he's also inspired African Americans everywhere through his work. He continued as a socialist, environmentalist, and as a writer. The NAACP is the oldest and largest civil rights organization in America. It was founded in 1909 by Du Bois and several other members of the Niagara movement. The notable achievements of the NAACP are the cases they have won. One of the cases is the grandfather clause. In the grandfather clause, if a man could not pass his literacy test but had a grandfather who could vote, he could vote. This meant that African Americans were largely excluded from voting. By challenging the law, they got it appealed. Another notable case is the Brown versus the Board of Education, in which it was declared that segregation in schools was unconstitutional. Another noticeable achievement was the Voting Rights Act of 1965, in which racial discrimination was banned in voting. Bobby Seale and the NAACP are important because they inspire people to stand up for what they believe in, and they have caused great impact in the civil rights movement.
Vicky. Presenting two of the events that led to the civil rights movement. The first was the Scottsboro Boys trials and the ratification. Speaking about significant events that influenced the civil rights movement. In 1931, the Scottsboro Boys, ages 13 to 19 years, were wrongly accused of raping two white women on a train. 8 of the 9 were sentenced to the death penalty. Over the span of 80 years, the 9 boys were tried and retried. Together, the boys served an 100-year sentence. This event was significant to the civil rights movement because it called for a more diversified jury and led to the fundamental rights for all Americans. The 14th and 15th Amendments gave the majority of African Americans the right to equal protection under the law and gave African Americans the right to vote. Both of these events set legal precedents for future generations. The trials and appeals were a milestone for the U.S. Supreme Court because it proved the unequal and injustice treatment and representation of the boys. The courts later overturned their convictions on the basis of this alone. The writer Harper Lee based her novel To Kill a Mockingbird on the boy's experiences